Good day, Suburban readers and now Suburban viewers, and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Pages. I'm Beryl Wiseman, editor-in-chief of the Suburban Newspaper Group, and this is one of 5 shows, as many of you know, in the Suburban on Air. And we've now got video, and my broadcast covers news and opinions, and the newsmakers, and Mike Cohen does gossip and entertainment and the social scene. Chelsea St. Pierre does business. Mark Ledbetter does sports. And we've got you covered in print, and we've got you covered on video. Today's broadcast is going to be right under the headlines. And I'll give it to you straight as an introduction before I introduce our very special guest. What's wrong with the cops? Our problems are not the same as the United States. But, as many of you know, I spent a lifetime in anti-racism work. And a lot of that had to do with police officers. I go down the litany of cases: Rowan Wilson, Stacey Bishop, Courtney Bishop, Anthony Griffith. People who've been abused, innocent people who've been abused, who've died in police custody. Taxi drivers, black taxi drivers, who are put upon by cops that simply don't like blacks. We've gotten many suspended. There's another aspect, though. Where does it come from? There is an arrogance among police. And when we say problems with police officers, I'm not talking about all of them. It's 20%. But when you have 20% of people with such power in a city, it infects everybody else and it does a lot of damage. I'm very, very happy to have with me, and full disclosure, Pietro Poletti. Pietro Poletti, for 30 years, was in the SPVM. He ended his career with the rank of lieutenant detective. He was one of the most senior people in the organized crime unit. And he spent 5 years, the past 5 years, he recently retired, as commander of public safety for the city of Hampstead. One of the most decorated officers, one of the most knowledgeable people, and one of the bravest police officers. He was the whistleblower who went to the media and showed that internal affairs, the very people that were supposed to be keeping people in line, had cases of collusion, fabrication of evidence, you name it. Welcome, Pietro. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Beryl.
I don't know where to start because you know it all, but the question that's asked on the street, the water cooler question is, what's wrong with the cops? Why so many, not just in the States, we're not as bad as the States, but why so much aggression generally to the people? And we've seen it in the past 2 months of the lockdown, where police officers were giving tickets to 2 people sitting in a car who didn't live at the same address, 2 people from Longueuil who were tourists in Place du Canada, that weren't even infractions of bylaws, all the way to the racism cases. Is it something that's caused in the formation and in their training at Nicolette? What is it? What is it with the cops?
Well, you made one thing clear, Beryl, is that we're nothing like the United States with this. We're not comparable at all. However, we do take their training. We like to adhere to their methods. Is it because of the media? Is it because of the culture? So let's make that clear. And I don't want to talk about the George Floyd case, because that was horrific, a tragic incident. The police officer was out of hand. Now, can it happen in Canada? Of course it can, and it will. The relationships between the community and the police officers are not at their best. Where does the problem derive from? Well, first and foremost, we have a very, very, very young police force. The average experience on the street, I would say, is about 3.5 years, patrol officers. So, yes, it's training. Second, and if we noticed, let's get back where we have something in common with the United States, to the Floyd case. If you watch the video, 5 police officers get on the scene. And I sincerely believe racism had nothing to do with it, because they got a 911 call, a plaintiff, a victim call, and they showed up. They never asked, is he black, white, green? So where I'm really concerned is this whole incident, the intervention that occurred in the United States, and it happens in Montreal daily. I am in contact with police officers.
The question of racial profiling. For example, blacks being stopped in a car because the car looks too rich.
No, well, let me finish this.
Sure.
We had 5 agents, 5 constables, police officers on the scene, and the intervention took 15 minutes. Where was the supervisor? Didn't anybody hear anything at their headquarters, at their police station, that something was going down? No sergeant showed up or supervisor. So that's one of the major problems we have in Montreal, is supervision, accountability. It's a very young police force, and I'll admit, I was the first. When I joined at the age of 20, I was a young, and you
20, I didn't even know that.
20 years
Wow.
old. I started in the South Shore, Greenfield Park. I was a gun-ho. I was on a power trip. You're given a gun at the age of 20 and with lots of powers. Thank God I always had senior officers next to me that trained me. I couldn't touch the steering wheel for 6 months. I was just a passenger, answer the radio calls and write the reports. That's what's missing today. It's a very young police force. Now, having said that, the training is, policing in Montreal has changed, and in Quebec, drastically.
By the way, when
in
you
the
say
last-
young police force, is that because people are taking early retirement? Like
Early retirement,
What,
the
what
baby
would be
boom.
what would be a better average years of service? 5, 6?
Well, when we determined the union and the departments with the baby boomers, life expectancy was 70 years old. Now it's in the 80s. So you have police officers retiring at 50, 53. I retired at 54. Now, so that's one of the major problems. And they're leaving very young, and they're leaving with experience, and nothing's left behind. The other one is that we've been defunding policing for the last 15 years. When I hear it today, defunded, no, policing has defunded itself. We've
You're talking
promoted,
about the political budgets, the public
Political.
security budgets.
even though the budgets are raised every year, close to $1 billion more in Montreal, without considering the infrastructures. What's happened is they're outsourcing. External entities are running the police departments. You understand? I'll give you an example.
What do you mean by an external entity?
Well,
I
they'll
think you-
consult human resources firms, the
Right.
psychological profiles of the promotions, which for the upper echelons means nothing. It's just a formality. There's people that the firms they don't recommend as ranking officers. They still hire them because the buddy system goes on, and it's institutionalized. So, having said that, I know somebody that got a promotion 3 times in 1 month and was sent 3 times to the firm to get evaluated, and that's $5,000 a shot. And that report's just shoved. They don't even look at it because they want Barrow to be, it's institutionalized patronism.
But that goes to another question. So, I mean, you've helped me out quietly over the years on many cases. And I recall, I don't know why this case sticks in my mind. We all remember still the Rowan Wilson case, the young man who was tackled to the ground. He was wearing the suit. Some dépanneur had been robbed. The only description the owner gave to the police was a black man, and he died 24 hours later in police custody in NDG. Still hasn't been a coroner's inquest into it. But day-to-day stuff on the street. So I remember the Courtney Bishop case. Young man, Dean's List at Concordia, walks in with his teammates from a rugby team into a bar in Crescent Street. They're allowed in. He's not, on the pretext that his pants are too baggy. And the doorman then calls the police, says there's a young black man here with a gun. By the time he reached St. Catherine and Crescent, 4 squad cars around him with a gun to his head, pinned to the ground.
Okay.
And you know that I've lived these things and advocated 1 a month at least that I've been involved with, if not 2 a month. Why does that happen? Is there something, by the way, and this is the question I'm leading to, is there something that's translating, is there something about our culture wars between the Francophone majority and the minorities, everybody, Italians, blacks, Jews? Is that culture war, that nationalism, if you want, of the past 40 years, is that translating into how cops treat people on the street? And even within the department?
Within the department, Barrow, I whistleblowed. I wasn't the only one. We're 4 or 5.
No, we wrote about the story of
Exactly.
the 3 officers.
There's ethnic discrimination within the department, right? And yes, they have affirmative action programs enacted in place. Well, whenever you put an affirmative action policy in place, that means there's a problem, or else you wouldn't have to enact it. Now, on the streets, I could guarantee you 99% of the police officers are not racist. I've never seen systematic racism. These terms, I don't know where they come out of. They're answering calls, they're doing their best. Are they badly trained? Yes. What we used to do 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, I worked downtown most of my career, 2 police officers. Today, it will take probably 5 or 6. They arrive in gangs, 5, 6 patrol cars, and so what occurs then? What occurs is the groupthink. The groupthink. One person screws up or doesn't, and they all embark on it. Communication is lost. Now, the other thing, officers, like I said, the selection has to start. We have to. I grew up in Villamar, St. Henry, and I went to school. I grew up with the Irish, the French, the Italians. One of the reasons why I joined the police department, because I saw racism in the 70s and 80s. 3 Italians at a street corner, that was the mafia, and it still exists today. If I tell you, Beryl, in the year 2020, today, as we speak, police officers are not allowed to enter an Italian cafe to have a coffee. Because they're
not allowed.
They're not allowed. They have to ask for permission. It's totally ridiculous. Community policing.
Yet we know one thing, the numbers are there. A person of color, particularly African Canadians, are stopped by police 3-4 times as much as white people. And stopped. Every month there's 1 or 2 cases of nonsense. Somebody is stopped because we just wanted to check because you're driving a very fancy car, or there was the case in LaSalle where people didn't believe that this black man had a very Quebecois name. I believe it was
Yes.
Jean-Denis Bellefeuille, and they didn't believe the name. And then there was the case of Brian Small, who was stopped and given a ticket because they said, you're innocent, but we had a robbery, and the only description was there was a black man making trouble. They didn't like the fact that Small was talking back. And this is every 2 weeks.
Well, Beryl, we got to be careful, and the people listening and watching, they have to be careful. There's always 2 sides to a story. I was a uniform cop for years. And if police officers stop you, there's a reason. I still don't believe it, and I see it, they won't stop you for no reason. So, do police officers profile? I don't like the word profiling. They analyze your behavior. Okay? Now let's call a spade a spade. And this is
I think what profile means in the political context is, look, if somebody has a robbery and part of the description is the person is black, that's not profiling, that's part of the description. I think what they're talking about is stopping people who are black because they look a little whatever to a cop. And he won't do that to a white person.
Well, no, that happens.
I'm a Côte d'Ivoire boy. I saw it growing up.
It happens to Italians, it happens to Chinese. Now, are there rotten apples? Absolutely.
Well, okay, but if it happens to Italians and Chinese, that's also profiling.
Well,
if a cop is in an Italian neighborhood, is he going to hassle Italians more often?
absolutely. Well, they're only Italians.
No, but specifically.
Law enforcement, one of the major problems in this hypocrisy I see every day in the papers, journalism, and there's an hypocrisy. First of all, Montreal Police Department is not transparent. Do people really know what
They're
a police
not transparent.
They're not.
Right.
Does the public really know what a police officer does? No. They answer over 1 million calls a year. Do they make mistakes? Absolutely. Absolutely. But the problem is not there. I'll give you another example, Beryl, and we have to call a spade a spade. The other day I was driving on Saint Jacques. There's a motel, and this is where the danger is going to arrive in the future. There was a black fellow, came out with 3 young girls, not older than 15, 16 years old. Now you're a police officer sitting in your police cruiser, and you see this coming out of a motel. What would you assume? Would you check that person out?
And you're saying the girl is looks underage?
No, I'm asking, you're sitting in a police car, and
Right.
you see an individual coming out of a motel room with 3 young girls.
When you say young girls, young
15
women, or
young women, very young, adolescents, 15 years old.
it
What
could,
would you do?
it could reasonably be assumed they're below legal age, right?
They were definitely visually below legal
It would
age.
be his responsibility.
Answer my question,
It would be
Beryl.
his responsibility to get out and find out what's going on.
And what would you assume? What's
Well-
your perception? I'm gonna ask you the question.
the assumption would not be something very, very pleasant to the guy. If there's a guy walking out of a motel with 3 girls that look underage, I'm not gonna think that he's a hero. He's not a priest, that's for sure.
What would you assume, seriously? This
I would assume
been-
trafficking,
Exactly.
prostitution.
So, yes, the police officer will pull them over. But what I witnessed, because of what's going on in the streets and the media today, there was a police cruiser right across the street. They just closed their eyes and drove off. They could have been 3 young missing girls, and we know that's a big problem in Montreal. Runaways, prostitution, and any police officer will tell you on the street. The Italian mafia doesn't deal with prostitution, juvenile prostitution. We got to call a spade here and make people aware. Bikers don't deal with it, juvenile prostitutions. Street gangs, yes. Now, but this is where we have to clarify and stop being hypocrites and telling people lies. Italians, maybe 1% of the time, not even 0.001% are part of the Italian mafia. Yes. I was an Italian cop. I worked the Italian mafia. I booked hundreds of them. Does that make me a profiler? Does that make me a racist against my own people? No. The department thought so.
You seem to be saying, and I want us to spend the balance of our time on this. You don't seem to be saying, we've written about you.
Yes.
We've written about the other 3 officers. You said it in this interview that there is ethnic discrimination within the department.
Absolutely.
However, people like me also have our day-to-day experiences. I've seen it. I've been there. I've seen officers.
You cannot generalize the exception.
Well, I'm not sure that it's the exception.
Well, you don't know what really happened between the doorman and the
No,
back
but
club.
put that case aside. I see it every day that a police officer, and I said 20% of the force is just too coarse, too rough, bad. Not 100, 20. I see it every day that police officers are stopping perfectly normally dressed in broad daylight.
Well, what'd you just say, Beryl?
That they are stopping.
You saw.
I saw.
You don't know why they saw.
No, but the cases that are brought to me is that we're going to be hearing, to your point of bullshit out there, we're going to be hearing right now in every jurisdiction in North America, because politicians are politicians, they're going to be coming forward with recommendations.
Yeah.
What should we really be concentrating on in Montreal on this problem?
I've been saying it for the past 15 years.
On the obvious problem that people see, that stays in their imaginations.
Police officers are badly led, badly supervised. Now, if I tell you, all the police stations in Montreal during this COVID are closed. There's not one police station that's open. Detectives are working from home. Detectives are working from home. This is totally ridiculous.
No, I know that some of the stations I've been to,
They're closed.
they're closed, but there's one person on duty. I don't know what the others are.
You can't walk in. You got to call.
Yeah, there's a little.
Control.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing, detectives are working from home. Half of them, they work from home. This is totally ridiculous. Police officers are discouraged from making arrests because when they bring them to the
They're
center,
certainly not discouraged from writing tickets.
Beryl,
Including to me, because I took 6 seconds instead of
Yeah.
3 to go through a green light.
but we're enticing this. Police officers, 99% of their job is not giving tickets. It's public relations and community policing. Community policing in this city has lasted 4 years during the reign of Jacques Duchesneau. He was the only really police chief we had. He made changes. 49 police stations are already down to 30, and they're closing
These
other
are the
ones.
community police stations.
That's right. So as soon as he left, they started dismantling community policing. And having said that police officers today, they have air-conditioned cars, they have a screen, iPhones, the public should notice this, they're always, patrol sectors don't exist no more. They just answer calls, okay? And they go back to the station. What an intervention took 20 years ago, 15 minutes, today takes 3 hours. And the excuse of that there's more paperwork is hogwash. Now, one of the other major factors is that we're selecting people from outside of Montreal. And this has always been going on. Somebody that lives in Chicoutimi, grew up in Chicoutimi, you bring him downtown Montreal, he's totally at awe. He doesn't know the city, doesn't know the fabric, the multiculturalism. So that's one of the major factors. I worked with a fellow who ended up being
Is there a
assistant.
problem in Nicolette, the police academy?
Absolutely.
Of Montrealers applying to be police officers?
No, well, it starts at the CJEP level, 3 years. It's
Right.
not that one. It's the problem is that we left the paramilitary way of doing things. So Nicolette actually is a 3-star. They call it the École Nationale de la Police. It's a 3-star hotel. I believe it's rated as a 3-star hotel. In the front door of the police academy, which is totally ridiculous. So right there, when the officer walks in, he knows it's a social worker training. They do everything but policing. They're trained to do everything but policing. Let them do what they know best, is police work.
So what is the one recommendation, let's end on this note, that you could tell politicians, because they're gonna be coming forward with things that are gonna make you crazy. They have to respond to a public demand to do something, to show that they're doing something. What is one positive thing that the government can do to make relations between the police and the minority communities better?
Well,
Even if you don't absolutely believe it, what's the best effective thing that you can show?
I got wind of already the report that'll be submitted by the police July the 7th and 8th. It's a rag. Somebody up working with the police director called me up and says, listen, Pete, I don't know where he's a fellow from the SQ, he hides in his office. He has a hard time finding people in St. Catherine. He's not from Montreal. He didn't come up from the ranks. I'd rather see a
No,
civilian.
but I'm not asking what they're gonna do, I'm asking what you would suggest
I would
Premier
suggest,
Legault
and
to
I've
do,
been
because it's gonna be at the
I've
legal
been
level.
saying it on the paper, not only me, hundreds of police officers, there needs to be a public inquiry on policing in Quebec. How the system works, how they get promotions, who are the people that we're putting up there collecting $200,000 a year doing zero.
But how is that gonna help the relations on the street? Is
Well,
there
because
any suggestion you
I
would
met
have?
last night.
No, but is there any suggestion you would have? Premier Legault is gonna have to come up with something like every governor and premier.
Listen.
What could you tell him is the most
Huh.
practical thing to do to
Practical
satisfy the minority
The
population?
minority population is the practical, start off, he doesn't want to go to route of public inquiry on corruption, fine. Let's start off with a parliamentary commission. Invite individuals, ex-police officers, active police officers, who were on the street, who were on the terrain, and accept the truth and not camouflage it. There is a problem. Ethnic discrimination, there is. Racism, systematic, no. Are police officers, some, a small minority, racist? Probably. Like any other segment of society, it's a reflection of society. So the selection, education, I would say, better supervision, more supervisors. There are many supervisors, actually 25% of the force has a rank.
Last question, Pietro, because we're really running out of time. I have to ask you this, because this is what's being proposed in major American cities. Now, don't get excited. I don't like it. You're going to like it less. And it's starting in Minneapolis. So what do they mean? What do they mean by defunding? I know what you mean, and it's true. It's happened. They want to see in every police station community representatives there with the desk sergeant, taking down reports of who's going where and who's responded to what, and then it's brought once a month to a community council together with police officers.
Well,
You think we should go that far?
I think we need a civilian watchdog group. I really
You do?
Absolutely. And I think, I speak often, Mr. ex-police chiefs or ex-police officers, and we all agree on one thing. There should be, they have a bureau d'enquête in the matin, but that's after the fact.
You're not talking about the deontologie.
No, the investigative
Right.
branch that they're supposedly, theoretically, they're supposed to be independent. So if they're a police officer during an intervention commits or inflicts bodily harm or death occurs, they step in and investigate. But that's after the fact. There should be a watchdog group, and patrol the streets, listen into the calls, and observe. As
Like
observers.
neighborhood watch, or like to have in Atlanta citizens police?
Citizens on patrol.
Citizens.
On patrol. And that would probably be effective. Not in the police station. Why not directly next to the desk sergeant? It's totally ridiculous because there's a privacy, and we got to respect the Charter of Human Rights. They're sworn peace officers, which the other the watch. But patrolling and observing what's going on, a watchdog group, absolutely.
And perhaps telling the officers who people are in a certain neighborhood.
That's an excellent idea. But they have to be totally objective and not subjective.
Everybody does, that's a problem.
That's the problem, in human nature. So let us please start off with the internal wars at the headquarters, the incompetence that's there, and people have to listen, and especially the mayor. They toy with journalists. They have learned to manipulate politicians, the upper echelons.
For sure.
And the officers feel this, and the officers are frustrated. I met 8 police officers last night, and they said, we're frustrated. We don't even know what a police chief is. No, they never met him. He never goes on the streets. Just a fact. And people have to remember the mentality. He said publicly, if they invite me, I'll go to the demonstration. You're the police chief. You need an invitation.
You don't need an invitation.
What kind of stupidity and
We've
nonsense.
seen enough sheriffs and chiefs of police who went on their own and marched with the marchers.
And I think Quebec is unique when it comes to
It's unique in so
and
many things.
Ontario is, it's more of a law and order society. On the police cars in Ontario and Alberta, it says serve and protect. Where do you see that inscribed in the police cars in Montreal? Nowhere.
No. Isn't serve and protect LA also?
All over the states, in Canada too, to serve and protect, or whatever motto.
What
they
do we have in our police
Nothing.
Oh, okay.
A number that just depicts the police car,
Right.
let's say 12. The 1 is the number of the car. In the they kept that as the number of the sector, but the sectors don't exist no more.
Pietro, I think that's a terrific place to stop because people have to remember that. To serve and protect, and that's what you've done, and we thank you for your service.
Thank you,
and
brother.
you're a wonderful friend and you're a wonderful public
Thank you.
servant. Folks, it's a lot to think about. This man, after a lifetime on the streets and a lifetime in the corridors of power, he knows wherever he speaks. So the more you hear these stories roll out on the news, remember what you heard today with my dear friend, retired Lieutenant Detective Pietro Poletti. And I thank you all for looking in and being with us, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much, good day, and good luck.